April 12, 1928. A U.S. Department of Agriculture survey team, their boots caked with the red dust of the American Southwest, submitted their official findings. After months traversing the parched landscapes, observing the intricate fields tended by Zuni, Hopi, Akimel Odom, and countless other indigenous nations, their conclusion landed like a lead weight in the annals of Western science. The thousands of years of sophisticated dryland agriculture were summarily deemed primitive and inefficient. This wasn't a casual aside in a dusty memo. It was a formal institutional decree published in a government report that would shape policy for decades. It was a judgment passed from a position of profound ignorance, a dismissal of systems that had not merely sustained but allowed vibrant civilizations to flourish in the harshest climates for millennia, far longer than any Western agricultural model had ever endured. This wasn't just a misinterpretation, it was a deliberate intellectual erasure, a scientific endorsement of a colonial mindset that refused to acknowledge genius outside its own narrow worldview. What profound knowledge, painstakingly developed over hundreds of generations, was about to be bulldozed in the name of progress? To understand the sheer arrogance of this pronouncement, we must step back into the prevailing scientific zeitgeist of the early 20th century. Western agriculture was in the throes of a revolution, driven by industrialization, mechanization, and the promise of chemical fertilizers. The prevailing belief was that nature must be conquered, not collaborated with. Large-scale monoculture, deep plowing, and extensive irrigation projects were championed as the epitome of modern efficiency. Scientists, largely trained in European and East Coast institutions, arrived in the Southwest carrying these biases like invisible baggage. They saw small, dispersed plots, irregular planting patterns, and an apparent lack of heavy machinery, and immediately concluded that these methods were backward. They measured yield per acre using Western metrics, failing to account for resilience, biodiversity, soil health, or the spiritual and cultural values woven into indigenous food systems. They saw what they expected to see, a reflection of their own preconceived notions of savagery versus civilization. Consider the context. The Great Depression was looming, and the calamitous Dust Bowl was just around the corner, a direct consequence of the very industrial farming practices that the USDA was promoting. Yet, the indigenous communities, whose farming methods had weathered centuries of drought and ecological shifts, were being told their knowledge was inferior. Their crops, often genetically diverse land races adapted over millennia to specific microclimates and soil conditions, were overlooked in favor of hybrid seeds designed for high-input, water-intensive agriculture. Their intricate water harvesting techniques like check dams, terracing, and strategic planting in depressions to capture runoff were dismissed as rudimentary. The very concept of working the land, observing its subtle cues, and fostering complex ecological relationships was alien to a science fixated on control and extraction. The USDA report, though perhaps not intentionally malicious in every sentence, served as a powerful tool for justifying the continued marginalization and dispossession of indigenous peoples. If their farming was inefficient, then their land could be better utilized by modern settlers. If their knowledge was primitive, then there was no need to consult them, no wisdom to glean. This dismissal wasn't just academic, it had real-world consequences, paving the way for policies that actively discouraged traditional farming, pushed indigenous children into boarding schools where their cultural knowledge was suppressed, and diverted resources away from sustainable local food systems towards large-scale, often environmentally destructive commercial enterprises. It fostered an environment where the deep interconnected understanding of the desert ecosystem, developed over thousands of years, was not merely ignored, but actively undermined. The psychological impact on indigenous communities was profound. Imagine being told by an outside authority, backed by the full weight of government and science, that your way of life, your very means of survival, was backward. It chipped away at self-determination and cultural pride, forcing many to abandon practices that had sustained them for generations, often leading to increased dependence on external food sources and a decline in health. The irony, of course, is that the very progress being championed would soon face its own catastrophic failures in these same arid lands. But for now, the verdict was rendered, the experts had spoken, and an entire body of ecological wisdom was placed firmly on the scrap heap of history, waiting for a future generation to rediscover what was always there. The question that lingers is not just about the loss of knowledge, but the immense cost of this intellectual blindness, a cost that would ripple through ecosystems and human societies for a century to come. Following that damning 1928 report, an insidious pattern solidified across the globe wherever Western science encountered indigenous land management. While official science scoffed, indigenous communities, often in quiet defiance, continued to practice and refine their ingenious methods. These weren't crude attempts at survival. They were sophisticated, localized ecological engineering marvels honed over millennia. Yet, when the very principles underpinning these successful systems, water harvesting, polyculture, drought-resistant seed saving, regenerative soil practices, were later discovered and rebranded by Western researchers, the original innovators' names consistently vanished from the citations, if they were ever acknowledged at all. This wasn't merely oversight, it was a systematic intellectual appropriation, a form of cognitive injustice that stripped credit from the true architects of sustainable desert living. Let's delve into some of these primitive technologies that history tried to erase. Take the Zuni people of New Mexico, whose waffle gardens are a testament to meticulous observation and engineering. These aren't sprawling fields, but small, elevated squares of earth surrounded by low earthen walls, creating a grid-like pattern resembling a waffle. Each square acts as a micro-catchment basin, trapping every precious drop of rainfall and snowmelt, holding it directly over the plant's roots. This design minimizes evaporation, creates localized microclimates, and concentrates nutrients, allowing corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, to thrive where conventional farming would fail. Dr. William Doolittle, an historical geographer, has extensively documented these systems, providing archaeological evidence dating back centuries, showing their consistent effectiveness. His work, alongside Zuni elders' oral histories, reveals not just a technique, but a holistic understanding of water cycles and soil dynamics. Yet, for decades, these sophisticated hydrological systems were simply dismissed as quaint curiosities, not serious agricultural science. Further west, in what is now Arizona, the Hohokam people engineered a vast network of irrigation canals that rivaled the hydraulic achievements of ancient Rome, spanning over 1,000 miles and supporting a population of tens of thousands. Imagine, in a searing desert, a civilization thrived for over 1,000 years by diverting river water through meticulously graded channels, some over 20 miles long, to cultivate extensive fields. Archaeological excavations, such as those at Snaketown, reveal complex hydraulic engineering, including diversion weirs, headgates, and precise gradient control that allowed water to flow efficiently without eroding the channels. These systems required immense communal effort, sophisticated surveying skills, and a profound understanding of hydrology and geology. Dr. Jonathan Mabry, an archaeologist specializing in Hohokam agriculture, points out that the sustainability of these systems for over a millennia stands in stark contrast to the rapid degradation often seen in modern large-scale irrigation projects. Yet, when American settlers arrived in the 19th century, they often marveled at the ancient ruins without connecting them to the living descendants of those engineers, instead imposing their own less sustainable water management practices. And it wasn't confined to the American Southwest. Across the globe, similar stories unfold. In Australia, Aboriginal people developed sophisticated land management through fire stick farming, a practice now recognized as vital for ecological health. For tens of thousands of years, they used controlled, cool-burning fires to manage vegetation, encourage the growth of edible plants, create fire breaks, and reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires. This wasn't indiscriminate burning. It was a precise, seasonal application of fire guided by deep ecological knowledge of specific plant species and animal habitats. Anthropologists like Bill Gammage, in his seminal work, The Biggest Estate on Earth, provides overwhelming evidence that the Australian landscape before European colonization was a managed park, a testament to Aboriginal ingenuity. However, upon colonization, this practice was outlawed, deemed primitive and destructive, leading to unprecedented fuel loads and the devastating bushfires we see today. The mechanism of this intellectual erasure was multifaceted. First, there was the explicit dismissal in official reports, as seen with the USDA. Second, the lack of formal Western academic training for Indigenous knowledge holders meant their contributions were not published in peer-reviewed journals, the gatekeepers of legitimate science. Third, and perhaps most insidious, was the process of discovery by Western scientists. They would observe Indigenous practices, often through ethnographic studies, extract the core principles, and then publish these ideas as their own innovations or as new scientific findings without proper attribution. Seeds cultivated and adapted for millennia by Indigenous farmers were collected, hybridized, and patented by corporations with no benefit sharing for the original developers. This intellectual theft wasn't just an act of academic dishonesty. It was a perpetuation of colonial power dynamics, where the knowledge of the marginalized was deemed public domain for the benefit of the dominant culture. The consequences of this deliberate ignorance and appropriation were catastrophic. In the American Southwest, the imposition of monoculture and deep plowing, combined with unsustainable irrigation, led to severe soil erosion and the Dust Bowl. In Australia, the suppression of fire stick farming led to ecological imbalance and more destructive wildfires. Globally, the dismissal of drought-resistant land races in favor of genetically uniformed cash crops increased vulnerability to climate shocks, leading to food insecurity. Who truly benefited from this intellectual erasure, and what critical lessons, vital for our planet's future, were deliberately ignored for generations, leading to unsustainable practices and ecological devastation that we are only now beginning to comprehend? The cost of this stolen wisdom is measured not just in lost knowledge, but in ravaged landscapes and the profound injustice inflicted upon entire peoples. Decades after these vital methods were cast aside and their indigenous practitioners marginalized, the accelerating climate crisis is forcing a profound reckoning. The very techniques dismissed as primitive a century ago are now being rediscovered by modern permaculture pioneers, agroecology experts, and drought-resilient scientists as cutting-edge solutions for our planet's most pressing environmental challenges. The irony is stark. The answers to our future food security and ecological regeneration were here all along, patiently practiced and preserved by those whom history tried to silence. Consider the resurgence of interest in water harvesting techniques. Modern permaculture design now heavily features swales, keyline plowing, and contour planting, all direct analogs to ancient indigenous methods of trapping and slowly releasing water across landscapes. Researchers like Dr. Brad Lancaster, a leading expert in rainwater harvesting, frequently cites traditional practices from arid regions globally, demonstrating how simple earth-sculpting techniques can regenerate degraded land, recharge aquifers, and grow food in incredibly dry conditions. His work provides compelling scientific validation for what the Zuni understood centuries ago, that every drop counts, and working with the land's contours is more effective than fighting against them. The waffle garden principle, for instance, is now being studied for its potential in urban farming and small-scale resilience projects, recognized for its efficiency and low-tech elegance. The shift is undeniable. UNESCO reports now highlight traditional ecological knowledge as not merely anecdotal, but crucial for global food security, biodiversity conservation, and climate change adaptation. These reports, often citing collaborative studies with indigenous communities, validate the efficacy of ancient land management practices, showing how indigenous approaches to soil health, polyculture, and biodiversity can regenerate degraded lands, enhance ecosystem services, and build resilience against extreme weather events. The scientific community is slowly, belatedly acknowledging that a holistic, long-term perspective, often rooted in spiritual and cultural connections to land, offers insights that reductionist Western science has often missed. Academic papers are now regularly published in leading journals, demonstrating the scientific validity of indigenous agricultural systems. Studies on ancient Andean terracing show superior soil retention and microclimate creation compared to modern conventional farming on similar slopes. Research into indigenous seed varieties, once dismissed, now reveals their superior genetic diversity, drought resistance, and nutritional value, offering critical genetic resources for developing climate-resilient crops. The once maligned practice of fire stick farming, after decades of devastating wildfires in Australia, is finally being re-embraced by land managers working alongside Aboriginal elders, leading to healthier ecosystems and reduced fire risk. These are not just isolated examples. They represent a fundamental paradigm shift in how we approach agriculture and ecological stewardship. But the question remains, can we truly decolonize our approach to agriculture, acknowledge the original brilliance, and integrate this wisdom without further appropriation? Or will history repeat itself, with the desert's original teachers once again overlooked as their solution save us? This isn't just about adopting techniques, it's about shifting power, recognizing intellectual sovereignty, and ensuring that indigenous communities are not merely consultants, but equal partners and leaders in shaping the future of sustainable agriculture. It means grappling with the legacy of historical injustice, ensuring that patents and profits derived from rediscovered indigenous knowledge are shared equitably, and respecting the cultural and spiritual dimensions that are inseparable from these practices. It means moving beyond a transactional relationship to one of genuine reciprocity. The solutions are here, embedded in ancient wisdom, waiting not to be discovered, but to be honored and amplified. The future of our planet may well depend on whether we finally choose to listen to those who have always understood how to live in harmony with the earth before it's too late.